Hi guys, and welcome to Time Travelling Team, the weekly podcast where we review every story of Doctor Who, right from the very beginning. I'm Paddy.
And I'm Trisha. Today we're going to be talking about the first story of Season 2, Planet of Giants. Before we get into the show proper though, I just want to call out that we would love to hear what you think of these stories. Would you give them the same score we did? Are there things that you noticed that we missed? To join in on the conversation, you can check us out at Time Teamp, that's TIMETEAMP, on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or you can email us at timetravelingteam@teamproductions.com. We would love to hear from you. Now, Paddy, why don't you give us a summary of today's story?
That I surely will. Episode 1, Planet of Giants. Inside the TARDIS, Barbara is observing the Doctor as he works at the console. She burns her hand on a part of the console and the Doctor instructs Susan to check the fault locator. He announces that they are approaching a planet which he believes is Earth in the mid-20th century, but as he is delivering this news, the TARDIS doors open. He hurriedly instructs Ian and Barbara to close them as they are in mid-flight and the results could be devastating. They manage to close the doors and the Doctor tells Susan again to check the fault locator thoroughly. He seems incredibly distressed and Ian and Barbara ask if he is alright, but he brushes off their questions in an irritated tone. They keep pressing him, but he says that they couldn't possibly understand and he goes to check the fault locator himself when Susan says everything is alright. When he comes back, he apologises to Barbara and seems calmer when he has confirmed what Susan had said earlier. They go to look at the exterior view screen, but it explodes, leaving them with no other choice but to investigate themselves. As they leave, the Doctor explains to Ian that with the doors open at the point of materialization, the space differential between the TARDIS and the rest of the universe is at a dangerous level, and that is why he's so puzzled as to their well-being. They appear to have arrived in some sort of canyon, but the stone walls of the canyon seem to have a strange origin. They split up, and Barbara and the Doctor going one way, and Susan and Ian the other. As they progress further, they come across more unusual flora and fauna, such as enormously overgrown earthworms and a giant ant, both of which are dead. The Doctor notices that the canyons that they are in seem to be of some pattern, almost as if they were created intentionally or man-made. Things take a more unusual turn when Ian and Susan come across a large piece of packaging with the word Norwich on it, beside an enormous matchbox, and Barbara and the Doctor come across a giant matchstick. The Doctor and Susan come to the same conclusion and reveal to their partners that they have shrunk down to about the size of an inch as a result of the space pressure differential. Ian says that this is impossible, but suddenly they are engulfed in darkness and the earth starts to shake. A full-size person picks up the matchbox, which Ian was standing inside, and walks off with it, just as the Doctor and Barbara return. It is revealed that the crevices that they are in are actually a cobblestone pathway of a household garden. The Doctor climbs to the top of one of the cobblestones and sees the man sitting down outside the house. He says that they need to rescue Ian before they can leave, otherwise he'll be trapped in that same size forever. In the garden, the man is met by another person, a businessman named Forrester. The visitor is a government scientist named Farrow, who has come to discuss the approval of an insecticide being manufactured by Forrester called DN6. Farrow says that unfortunately DN6 is too aggressive as it kills everything beyond the scope of its original design and affects all insect life that it comes in contact with. Forrester announces that if DN6 does not go into production, it will ruin him, but his bribery attempts are to no avail. As Farrow goes to phone his superiors, Forrest pulls a gun on him. The Doctor, Barbara and Susan are walking down the path when a bee falls from the sky dead. They notice the same aroma coming from it as all the other dead creatures that they have encountered, and deduce that there is something deadly in the environment which is affecting all manner of life. The Doctor warns them not to eat anything until they arrive back at the TARDIS. Suddenly they hear a thunderous explosion. Ian leaves the matchbox and sees Farrow dead on the ground. He meets the others and they get the scent of gunpowder, leading them to believe that the explosion was a gunshot and that Farrow was murdered. As they are discussing the environmental ramifications of what is killing the insects, a cat appears behind them. Episode 2, Dangerous Journey. The group remains perfectly still and eventually the cat becomes bored and moves off. The Doctor says that they will need to be careful to avoid the cat until they can get back to the TARDIS. Susan asks if they could not try and get help from the people in the house, but the others say that due to their size they would not be able to communicate properly. There is also the danger of them being viewed as freaks and marketed as such in some sort of sideshow. The Doctor points out that the greatest potential danger of the people in the house is the fact that one of them is a murderer. Suddenly, a shadow falls on them and they see someone approaching. They attempt to flee, but Barbara falls over. Ian picks her up, but they have to run in a different direction than the Doctor and Susan. They run inside Farrow's briefcase as it is the safest place at that moment in time. Forrester is returned with one of his own scientists, whose name is Smithers, and he tells him that Farrow pulled a gun on him in an attempt to blackmail him for a large cut of the profits of DN6, and in the ensuing struggle caused the gun to go off and kill Farrow. Smithers investigates the body and tells Forrester that his story won't hold up other investigation, as it is clear that Farrow was shot from a distance. However, he is willing to help with the cover-up in order to see his life's work of eliminating pest-induced starvation come to fruition. They agree to cover up Farrow's disappearance by making it look like his boat capsized on a way to a holiday in France, which he had earlier mentioned to Forrester. They store his briefcase in the lab before going to dispose of his body. After being put down, Ian and Barbara exit from the briefcase and take in their surroundings. Barbara is a bit battered and bruised due to their journey in the briefcase, so they agree to slowly explore the room. They see scientific equipment as they come out, and eventually they come across a mound of wheat, which Barbara discovers is coated in a sap-like substance after she touches it. Ian says that they are most likely in a laboratory which must be working on some sort of insecticide, hence all the dead insects outside. Barbara suddenly remembers the doctor's warning too late, but doesn't let on to Ian that she touched the coated wheat. She starts to realise the fatal consequences of what she has done, which Ian takes for depression at their current predicament. He tries to rally her spirits and says that they should try and find something in the briefcase to make a ladder to the ground. She agrees, hoping that there may be something in the briefcase that could give them more information of the insecticide. Ian climbs to the top of the briefcase in an attempt to open the clasp, thereby allowing them to let more light into it so they can search for something to make a rope ladder. While he is doing this, a large fly lands next to Barbara and she faints, but more so from exhaustion than fear. The fly goes away when Ian comes back to help Barbara and he takes her back to the wheat pile. Meanwhile, the doctor and Susan are outside, sheltering by a drain pipe that leads into the laboratory. Left with no other choice, they decide to climb up the pipe in an attempt to rescue their friends. The pipe interior is heavily corroded, so they have plenty of handholds to get them up there, but it is still a tough trek. They make it to the top exhausted and find themselves in a giant sink. They take a moment to rest before continuing their search. Barbara wakes up and Ian shows the fly lying dead on top of the wheat pile. He says it died instantly, which distresses Barbara greatly, and she is about to tell Ian of her fears of being infected when they hear Susan calling out for them. Her voice is amplified by the sink, acting as an echo chamber. They arrive at the sink and begin to climb down the plug chain to reach the doctor and Susan. Forrester and Smithers arrive in the lab to clean up after disposing of Farrow's body. Ian and Barbara climb back up the chain and the doctor and Susan go back down the drain to hide. Smithers notices the dead fly and is delighted that his invention works, but can't understand why Farrow was so against it. Forrester does not tell him about the virulence of DN6 and says Farrow was looking for an excuse to stop it. He says that they will need to alter the report so that DN6 can be approved. After cleaning up, Smithers unplugs the sink, causing water to cascade down into the doctor and Susan's hiding place. Episode 3, Crisis. The doctor and Susan climb into the overflow pipe just as water cascades behind them. Suddenly it stops. The doctor realises that the sink has been plugged again. He says that they will be in trouble if they fill the sink again, as water could come down the overflow pipe. They wait on tenterhooks as Smithers and Forrester unknowingly have command over their fate. Forrester realises that they need to move Farrow's body to the marina before the tide goes out. Smithers starts showing reluctance to the plan, but Forrester reminds him that he is involved now until the end since he made the decision to help move the body. They go back to the office and Smithers unplugs the sink before they leave. Neither of them notice the cat from earlier sneak into the lab. It goes to investigate the sink where it can smell the doctor and Susan. Once in the house, Forrester forges a different report of DN6 on a blank government form that already has Farrow's signature. Smithers starts a question as to why Farrow was so against the new pesticide. Ian and Barbara go down the plug chain to reunite with their friends, and on their way come across the corpse of the cat, having succumbed to the effects of DN6 from water near the sink. The doctor and Susan emerge from the drain and the group rejoices in their reunion. Ian shows the wheat mound to the doctor, and he states that it is the same aroma that he detected outside around the corpses of the insects. He also comes to the conclusion that the dead man was most likely murdered to cover up the virulence of DN6. The others say that they should go back to the TARDIS, but the doctor says that he cannot leave and risk the pesticide being released. Inside the main house, Forrester says that he will need to impersonate Farrow and give a phone report of his findings. He gives a glowing report of DN6 and continues the ruse by saying that he is now about to embark on his holiday. Unbeknownst to him, the local switchboard operator Hilda is listening in on the conversation and notices the change in Farrow's voice. She points this out to her husband Bert, who is the local police constable, but he says that she is being too nosy. However, she is not deterred and continues to eavesdrop on the conversation coming from the house while Bert goes out on his rounds. When he returns, Hilda tells him that she is certain that Forrester is pretending to be Farrow, but he says he cannot go and investigate as he doesn't have a justifiable reason. Back in the laboratory, the group comes across Smithers' notepad, which contains the formula for DN6. Barbara suggests that they review it to see if there is any possible cure for it. The others don't see the point in trying to find a cure, but they do agree that it's probably beneficial just to see what DN6 actually is. They eventually manage to copy it all out down to a more understandable size and note just how deadly it is. DN6 has actually been made everlasting and as a result can soak into the ground, affecting crops and water supplies, and therefore it is potentially deadly to humans. The doctor says that they will need to do something about this and suggests that they look for a telephone in the lab. They notice how Barbara is getting worse, but she still doesn't inform them over what she has done. They arrive at the telephone, but they hide when Smithers enters the lab looking for his notes. He goes back to the house when Forrester is finishing speaking to his sales manager, saying that he wants DN6 pushed heavily. Smithers comments on how everything seems to be tied up, but Forrester says that he doesn't want to get overconfident and tries to dial through to the switchboard. In the lab, Susan suggests that they prop up the receiver using test tube corks. As they do this, they notice Barbara getting progressively weak, but she says it is due to hunger. They eventually manage to prop up the receiver enough to open a line to the switchboard operator. However, it is to no avail as they cannot be heard due to their small size. Ian goes down to Barbara, who falls unconscious after warning Ian not to touch the handkerchief he had lent her earlier to wipe her hands. The doctor notices the aroma of DN6 off it and realizes that she must have come into contact with it, and Ian and Susan plead with the doctor to save her. Episode 4. The Urge to Live. Barbara wakes up and the doctor admonishes her for not telling them. He tells Ian that if they can get her to the TARDIS, then they can go back to her normal size and reduce the effects of DN6, but he doesn't let on to Ian that it is not certain if they can get back to it. At the switchboard, Hilda is getting more and more suspicious of the goings-on up at the house and sets the exchange line to a busy signal. The tone coming from the sound is magnified to an almost deafening level for the group. They run away back towards the sink. Barbara refuses to go any further as she says she cannot let DN6 be released. She has accepted her fate, but Ian begs her to let them save her and appeals to the doctor and Susan for aid, but they agree with Barbara. Inside the house, Smithers begins to question Forrester's story about Farrow's blackmail motivation, but Forrester tells him not to worry about it and goes back to try the phone again. Smithers mentions the other phone in the lab may be off the hook and says he will go and check on it, as he also wants to review Farrow's notes. This alarms Forrester, who prepares his gun in case he needs to take care of him as well. The doctor suggests starting a fire to draw the attention to the house in the hopes that Farrow's body is discovered. They think about using one of the gas taps in the lab, but hide when Smithers and Forrester return. When they come in and they see the cat dead on the countertop near the sink, Smithers notices that its fur is sticky and notices the aroma of DN6 coming from it. Forrester accuses Smithers of putting cork tops under the receiver, but Smithers is too occupied with the fact that DN6 seems to be deadlier than first thought. He demands to see Farrow's notes and notices that the last page is missing, causing him to question the blackmail story even further. He goes outside to investigate the garden as Farrow had stated in his notes that he had tested DN6 on a section of it to see the results. Forrester is about to go after him when the phone rings and it is Hilda on the other end of the line. She is suspicious of what has been going on in the house and is pretending to connect through a call for Farrow. Her suspicions are confirmed when she realizes Forrester is impersonating him, but Bert listens into the conversation and says he will go investigate. The travellers have managed to open one of the gas taps and Ian and Susan use one of the matches from Farrow's suitcase to set it aflame. They aim it at a can of pressurized insecticide in which will explode and set fire to the lab. Out in the garden, Smithers realizes the full effects of DN6 and demands to know the truth from Forrester. Forrester tells him the whole story and then pulls a gun on him to force him to help him dispose of Farrow's body. They go into the lab first to gather up his belongings, and just as they enter, the can explodes. A bit of metal strikes Forrester in the eyes, and Smithers uses this opportunity to disarm him. Bert arrives and proceeds to take both men into custody, and the travellers flee back to the TARDIS, carrying one of the infected wheat seeds with them. Back in the TARDIS, the Doctor replicates the journey that caused him to shrink, but first he must repair the exterior view screen so they can gauge if they are on the correct trajectory or not. The attempt is successful as the wheat seed that they brought with them shrinks down, showing that they have returned to their original size. Barbara recovers almost instantaneously, and the Doctor suggests that the others go to wash off any remnants of DN6 off their clothes. While they are doing this, the Doctor frustratedly tries to see their next destination through the view screen, but it is broken again. End of the story. So that is the story recap for Planet of Giants. So now we're going to get some trivia about this story from Trish. Over to you.
Cool. So, the writer for Planet of Giants was Lewis Marks. This is the first of 4 Doctor Who writing credits for Lewis. The others are Day of the Daleks, Planet of Evil, great story, and The Mask of Mandragora.
All of them are good stories.
They really are.
Yeah.
He was a writer and producer from the 1950s right up to the early 2000s, and he passed away back in 2010. This story has two directors. We have Mervyn Pinfield and Douglas Camfield. We previously discussed Mervyn in our episode The Sensorites. This is the second of his 3 directing credits, the last one being The Space Museum, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks. Douglas, often referred to as Dougie Camfield, this is his first Doctor Who directing job, but it will not be his last. He went on to direct 8 more stories over the years, and again, a lot of these are pretty big hitters. So we have The Crusade, The Time Meddler, The Daleks' Master Plan, The Web of Fear, The Invasion, Inferno, Terror of the Zygons, and The Seeds of Doom.
Oh, that's quite a repertoire for Doctor Who stories.
It really is, and we'll discuss more about, the amazing things that he added to the legacy of Doctor Who through those stories as we get to them. But he was really well respected among a lot of the actors as well, I can tell you that now.
Those are some universally top pick stories for each of those Doctors as well.
Yeah, they are. He was also a production assistant on An Unearthly Child and Marco Polo.
Oh.
Sadly, Dougie passed away in 1984. The air date for this story was the 31st of October to the 14th of November 1964. This story, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit last week, was actually recorded as part of season 1, but was then held back as the season opener for season 2. Now, people who are good at maths may have realised that I said the air date was the 31st of October to the 14th of November, which is 3 weeks. And Paddy summarised 4 episodes. So what's the what with that? Though fully scripted and recorded as a 4-parter, the 3rd and 4th episodes were merged into a single episode. So it was broadcast as 3 episodes, even though it was written and recorded as 4. And the BBC didn't keep the missing footage that they cut out of episodes 3 and 4. Recreations of these 2 episodes, which are the ones that we've used for this review, were included in the DVD release, with original cast members reprising their roles for the recorded dialogue wherever possible. The role of the Doctor in these recordings was provided by John Guyer. No, sorry, that name is just going to be a no-go for me. Why does this always happen to me?
Guilor.
Lor.
So, people, you can pronounce it however you wish.
Yeah. Who a year later would act as a voice double for William Hartnell in the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor.
I thought that was John Colshaw doing the Hartnell voice.
No, apparently John G.
Oh, well, fair dues to you.
Yeah. So, before we get into the rest of the trivia, we should probably discuss the fact that we chose to go with the 4-episode long version rather than the 3-episode long version for the story.
Yes.
Usually we try to go with what people would have seen at the time. However, this story was written as a 4-parter. Mm-hmm. And so we felt the story was best represented in 4 parts.
Yes.
Rather than in 2 parts and then a weird merged 3rd part.
And for anyone that decides to sit down and watch it as a 4-parter and then into a 3-parter, it's glaringly obvious that the cuts that were made, even when it's done down to a 3-parter, it's still not entirely sequential. Like, I don't know if anyone that's listening watches The Simpsons, but it's like when they're doing Radioactive Man movie and Milhouse runs away, so they just use various scenes of him to try and compost it all together, but it's just way out there. Like, they're using him in different locations, and I got a sense of that with this, is that it leaps and jumps around the place, and some of it's like, asking you questions like wait, what? How did he come to that realization? Why are they being so suspicious of him this way? It just seems really, really weird.
So if you do want to watch it in the way that me and Paddy watched it, and you have the DVD, episodes 1 and 2 as they appear under the episode listings, and then you can get episodes 3 and 4 by going to the special features. If you just watch the story, like play entire story, it'll give you the abridged episode 3 instead.
Yeah. And it is, if you do watch the 3 and 4, it is funny to listen to William Russell and Caroline Ford do their young voices.
So this is the first though certainly not the last, environmentalist Doctor Who story. Like the first one that kind of had a modern moral message that they wanted to get across. Like I said, this won't be the last time this comes up. On to our guest cast members this week. I'm going to say it right now, none of these appear in any other Doctor Who program. So I'm just going to get that out of the way at the beginning. So first we have Forrester, who's played by Alan Tilburn. Alan served in the army during World War II, though he was invalided out before the war ended. He appeared in other well-known British TV programmes, including the ever-present Z-Cars, Dad's Army, and The Sweeney, but he may perhaps be most recognisable from his role as R.K. Maroon in his last film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I knew him from something else, like much like Francis the Wolf, who played Vassor in Keys of Marinus. Like, those are eyebrows you'll never forget.
Yeah, I knew I recognised him from somewhere, and I couldn't pinpoint where. I haven't watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit in about 20 years, but I knew I recognised him from somewhere. So when I looked that up, I was like, that's it. That's
a lie, because we've at least watched it together in the 10 years that we've been friends. So
I don't think we have.
I'm pretty sure we have.
We're getting off topic.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we have. But that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, Alan sadly passed away in 2003. Next, as Pharaoh, though he doesn't appear on screen for very long, sadly, is played by Frank Crawshaw. Frank was born in 1899, and he appeared in many TV shows over the years, including Emmerdale, Coronation Street, and a lot of the other sort of British TV staples of the time. He passed away in 1984. Smithers is played by Reginald Barrett. He also appeared in Emmerdale, Last of the Summer Wine, The Avengers, and guess what?
Z-Cars.
As well as many, many other TV shows. He passed away in 1977. Hilda is played by Rosemary Johnson. Though she did appear in a few other TV roles, there weren't that many, and this is her most notable by far. Rosemary passed away in 1972. Lastly, as Bert, we have Fred Ferris. His acting credits include The Avengers, Taxi, Coronation Street, The Saint, Dixon of Docks Green, No Hiding Place, and guess what it is?
Z-Cars.
Indeed.
Is this going to be
also in Z-Cars? I think it's going to be like,
a drinking game.
Time traveling team, either a drinking game or bingo.
Yeah.
How many times in an episode can Trish say the words Z-Cars? Fred passed away in 1978.
I'm trying to think, is there any fun trivia to finish this note off on, other than the fact that I recently watched Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1 and 2, so Smithers and Forrester. It's like, how very apt.
I'll tell you my fun piece of trivia.
Yep.
When watching episode 1
yes,
for this review, I had to pause at one point because I was sat in my living room in the middle of the night laughing my ass off because all that came into my mind was bees.
Are we going to tell that story beforehand, or are we going to wait till we actually get to that season?
It may be a long time before we get there, so we'll just preface that story at this point by saying bees disappearing and just bees in general, long time internal joke between me and Paddy. Yes.
In terms of Doctor Who, not in terms of actual ecological loss of bees.
Yeah. So, a fairly contained story this week. So let's get into our character discussions. Paddy, thoughts on the Doctor?
So last episode in Reign of Terror, we discussed about the Doctor's vitality and his ability to walk 100 miles with nary breaking a sweat. It's almost like it was edited that way. But in this one, though, we do actually get to see him feel a bit of his age as he's walking, as they're climbing up the drain pipe. And whenever there's a chance for William Hartnell to act old, I like to see it, because he plays the the fact that the Doctor is someone that looks to be in their 60s, 70s, well, no, I'd say more 60s, but has such a kind of a youthful spirit. William Hartnell does that brilliantly, but when he plays his age, I can just imagine him kind of going, what am I using as inspiration? Oh wait, I've got a twinge in me back. I'll use that for this scene.
Yeah, an interesting thing about that, right? So they're an inch tall, roughly.
Yes.
How high would you say a drain pipe would go from outside to the kitchen?
So it depends. So like, okay, I'm going to say about maybe 3 foot.
Yeah. So a foot has 12 inches.
Yes.
So 3 feet would be about 36 inches
Yeah.
that they had to climb up that pipe.
Yeah.
So if you do the maths and math that up to a fully sized human being, we'll say a fairly tall human being, will be generous and say a 6 foot tall person, which is taller than me, shorter than you. That would mean a 6 foot person climbing to a height of 6 by 36, 180, 216-ish feet. That's insane.
I loved it. Your science brain was working there. But
and someone's going to tell me I got the maths wrong, but I don't care.
It's my show. I can be right if I want to be right. Yeah, like it's like that's what one thing I suppose I love about the whole Honey, I Shrunk the Doctor side of things is it's how kind of what's the word I'm trying to, how kind of clever and innovative that they can be with the surroundings and with the story, like the giant matchsticks and the matchboxes, and something as innocuous as climbing up a 3 foot tall drain pipe when you're roughly the size of an inch. Like, also they pointed out that the pipe leading up into the lab was corrugated. Like, Jesus, do you need a tetanus shot after that?
Definitely.
But it's also a really good thing that I don't think we've seen up until now. Was here we have a capacity where, or just we're in a story where the Doctor has the capacity to leave because the villains don't realize that they're even there. Whereas, like, say, like, so like we had the Sensorites where like the reservoir was poisoned, but they really couldn't leave because they were held at the power of the Sensorites. Whereas here they're under their own power, yet the Doctor chooses to stay, which I think it's like, again, would I be right in thinking that's the first time that we've seen this kind of thing where he's the one that says we can't leave?
I think so. The only other, because if we go by episode, so on An Earthly Child, they were kidnapped and were trying to get their way back.
Yeah.
Daleks, we kind of have it, but only, actually no, we don't, because Ian had left the fluid link behind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, not in Daleks. Edge, not applicable. Marco Polo, Marco won't let them leave.
Yeah.
And the TARDIS is broken. Marinus,
they're blocked off.
they're blocked off.
Aztecs, they're blocked off.
And yeah, Sensorites, they're not allowed to leave either. So yeah, this is the first time, and Reign of Terror, they're
separate.
kidnapped.
They're all separate. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, like this is the first time where we've seen instance that, like, okay, they're more than capable of leaving on their own volition, but he chooses to stay because of the potential dangers of DN6, and I liked it. And he was very calm. He wasn't very authoritative. Like, he didn't have his blustering voice. It was the simple matter of fact, we can't leave.
Yeah, and it's nice that we get that insight into that side of the Doctor. That like, if you watch New Who, you expect that. Of course he'd do that.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't expect that of this Doctor. It's not a go-to expectation. So it's nice that we get that so early on.
Yeah. And I think it's like, this is the one thing I suppose that like, in terms of like most Doctors, like, you know, because every Doctor probably has their downsides, or not their downsides, but their less they're not so good performances. And up until now, I don't think William Hartnell has really had a really bad performance. I'm not saying that this is a really bad performance. It just lends itself to he's constantly evolving the character the whole way along.
Yeah.
Like we've seen him for this is 9 stories now, which is equating to about nearly 40 something episodes if we put everything together, and we're still seeing more new sides to him. So like the fact that he stayed on for 3 years, he was the first Doctor, but with what we said before about the show being such a success, it's again down to William Hartnell and his ability to constantly evolve the Doctor, I think.
Yeah. What I like about this story as well is, we talked in the last story, when they were, obviously they didn't film it as finishing up season 1, but it ended up being the last one of season 1. That story starts with the Doctor being grumpy and having the royal hump with Ian and Barbara. This story also starts with him getting odd and snapping at people and stuff like that. Because again, like we've said, that's just part of who he is. At least this time, though, he acknowledges the fact that he kind of lost his temper. And he explains it, which is that he forgets the niceties under pressure. Which, actually, now that I think about it, a lot of the Doctors do.
Yeah.
Different pressures, admittedly. But they're not all nicey all the time.
Oh no, like there are times like the Doctor is an absolute dick.
Yeah. The one thing I loved though is he only apologized to Barbara.
Yeah.
He didn't bother apologizing to Chesterton. He only apologized to Barbara, which I love. You and I have discussed this separately before. I love the relationship dynamic between the Doctor and Barbara. And I love that he genuinely apologizes to her here, because you and I have discussed previously, I don't think he did apologize to her in Edge of Destruction.
Yeah. That's in the past, forget it.
Yeah, that's in the past. But here he does. And he realizes very quickly, I snapped at her, I shouldn't have, I need to apologize. And it's very much, my dear, I'm sorry. Which I love. And they have such a cute relationship together. They're so adorable.
Well, I think that's and I think it's a hallmark from Edge is that their relationship has constantly grown, and we know that there will be a time where Barbara and Ian leave, and that's going to be a one hell of a sad parting, because I think now he views Barbara as a sort of a daughter.
Yeah, me too.
And especially because she's so mature and she can make so many really strong decisions, as we've seen in the Aztecs or in Reign of Terror. And again, I have a feeling that he probably favors Barbara over Ian.
Yeah.
And so that's why he doesn't apologize to Ian. So unfortunately, that makes Ian the middle child, the looked over child.
I think his relationship with Barbara is because Barbara gives it straight, and he appreciates that. If we're going back to Edge, which is really where their friendship sort of truly began at the end of that episode, she laid into him, and she speaks truth. She doesn't mollycoddle. She speaks the truth when talking to him, and I think he appreciates that. And also, when it's come down the line of any discussions within the group, usually when the Doctor isn't completely by himself in his opinion, usually the Doctor and Barbara are actually have a similar mindset. So I think he sort of finds a kindred spirit in her in some ways.
Would this now be a good time to segue into our companion discussion leading off with Barbara?
One final thing on the Doctor before we jump into that is going back to what you said about his old man part showing. What I think is really evident in that, though, is kind of why I brought in the maths of, if you were to think about how high they actually climbed, relatively speaking.
Oh, yeah.
Is even though it's clearly difficult for him, and we can tell he's struggling. He is struggling to get up the pipe, and the fact that he has to go back down again, do you know what I mean? It's clearly difficult for him. But he will do it and he will put in his all because they're his friends.
Oh, yeah.
And it shows his dedication to his friends, which we haven't seen as often in season 1.
And like that's the thing as well, is that I probably didn't say it in the story recap, but Susan takes the lead when they're climbing up the pipe, and the Doctor is at the rear, so that way there's no one to help give him a boost if he starts to flag. And whether that's just the way, like, you know, it was deliberately written that way as a sort of the Doctor is the type of one that, look, I'm not going to let someone fucking give me a shove up the arse so that I can get up this drain pipe, or it could just be they did rock paper scissors for who goes first into the big dark scary pipe.
Yeah. So to your point, moving on to the Doctor's new best friend, Barbara.
Yeah.
I have a pet peeve that you are intimately familiar with.
Yes.
Which is, I don't like it when people hide the fact that they are ill.
Yes, I know that from experience. You do not like that.
I do not like that at all. It royally pisses me off. It helps absolutely nobody, and it only ends up hurting everyone in the long run.
Yes.
Like, kudos to Barbara for giving her all and trying to help, you know, with the phone and everything like that. But not telling people really didn't help. She did nothing wrong. They had no way of knowing before she picked up the grain that it was coated in anything that could have been dangerous. It was just sticky. You know, it could have been sugar puffs for all she knew. Not telling them, I'm like, Barbara, you're such an intelligent woman. Why are you being stupid?
Yeah, and watching that scene, I did want a bowl of sugar puffs. But watching that scene, it cemented that, well, for the time being, Barbara is out of my zombie survival / Aladdin Cave of Wonders exploration parties. Because, like, just, you know, for God's sake, woman, don't touch anything. And to your point about your pet peeve, I suppose maybe it's a small bit hypocritical of me to give out to someone about hiding the fact that they're sick from the rest of the people that care about them. It was still like all this stuff is going on. You know, like you've like you know shady weird shit is happening, and the one rule that you're told is not to touch anything. And it's like, hey, Ian, look at this. She does have one. She has one redeeming side to this moment of stupidity, in my estimation, and that's when she refuses to feel sorry for herself, and she wants to do the right thing by stopping DN6 before it can go global.
Oh yeah, like her heart, as always, is in the right place. It always is. It's just, and you know, it's a bit mean to call her out on it, I think, because obviously she was freaking terrified. And, you know, kudos to Jacqueline Hill, because she played this really well. She's clearly terrified beyond belief about what's going to happen to her. And she's clearly trying to save the others the pain of knowing that that's going to happen. But the fact that she would give up her own life, essentially, for the greater good, you know, to save the world as a whole. It really speaks to Barbara as a character, and it is a redeeming quality in this story where, like I said, I'm like, dude, what are you doing?
So does that mean the next time I get sick and don't tell you, you're going to think back in this episode and go, wait, he has redeeming qualities, I can't be too mad at him?
No, you don't get any more chances, because I expected you learned from your previous mistake, so no.
Fine.
So, speaking of Barbara and her becoming ill, we have to talk about the least observational scientist I think we've seen in a while, which is Mr. Ian Chesterton.
You must be looking at my notes, because I have down Ian Chesterton, man of science and poor perceptive hearing.
But like, dude, seriously, like, what the hell? What was your, so go on, what were your thoughts on him as a whole?
I think the word ass came in there before that word, so no. like, so when it came to this story, again, I was just like, okay, cool, like, you're in your element. You're like, and like we said, like, oh, we haven't seen Ian be a man of science for a while. Well, here he is, a man of science. And that's why I equate it to being just completely blind, deaf, and dumb to what's going on. He's that, I'm back in my old familiar territory, test tubes and science and widgets and whatnot. So Ian is very angry and scared in this story for quite a fair bit of time. And I put that down to the fact of he holds himself responsible for his lack of perception, that basically Barbara is sick because he wasn't paying attention.
In a mean way, I kind of think he should feel responsible. Dumbass.
Yeah.
Like, why did you think she wanted your handkerchief, Ian? What could she possibly have needed it for?
Yeah, like when it didn't come back with snot on it, it was like,
or when it didn't come back at all.
At all.
Joe, and the fact that you were just discussing, hey, this looks like it's covered in... And she's saying it out loud. It's sticky. Like, dude! Like, what the hell? In fairness to him, though, like, we talked about last week how we've had a lot of historical stories where Barbara could really come into her own. But most of the sciencey stories were kind of set in the future, so Ian didn't really have that option. Now we have a modern setting, very heavily science-based story. One thing I would have liked to have seen is Ian shouldn't need to describe chemical compounds with the descriptor of a C with a line at a 45-degree angle to a whatever. Just call it by the chemical it is, Ian. Yeah. Like, I know that, like, they couldn't see the whole page, but they can see what was essentially benzoic something or other. They can see that much. They can see the hexagonal benzene with the thing coming off it. He can see that, and he knows what it is. Just call it what it is. You're wasting time by describing each angle of each line, which I just thought was a bit annoying.
Yeah. Like, there was something about everyone in this story, not everyone, I'm sorry, because like I really enjoyed the Doctor in the story. I think there was just something about the companions in this story where there's more faults to their redeeming qualities, I think.
Yeah.
And I would put it down to, okay, they're completely out of their element, like, for fuck's sake, they're 1 inch tall.
Yeah. The other thing about Ian... Okay, so some background for our listeners. Right. Me and Patty discussed this when we were talking about last week's episode. So, Patty, what did you study in college?
I studied history.
Cool. And what did I study in college?
You studied science.
To be
Chemistry.
what exactly?
To be a science teacher.
Yes. So we actually have quite a lot in common with Ian and Barbara when it comes to our studies. Ian, you never, ever, ever, ever light a gas tap on fire. I get that you want to make the can explode, but you do not ever light a gas tap on fire. Bad science teacher Ian. Bad Ian.
But they were so happy to get that match lit.
That was funny.
Yeah.
that was very, very funny. So we talked about, the companions not exactly being at their strongest. They had some strong moments, but maybe not at their strongest in the story. So we have our final regular companion, which is Susan. What were your thoughts on Susan in this story?
Again, I feel like she's been relegated to the sidelines. Given the fact that the Doctor is shown to be struggling a bit here due to, I suppose, the physical nature of the challenges in front of them, I would have preferred to have seen Susan, now she's actually physically with her grandfather, be a bit stronger, be a bit more supportive, be a bit, come on grandfather, we can do this, come on, that type of thing, And I didn't see it here.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with you 100%. I agree with you a bit. I wouldn't agree with you 100% though, because I think she does get stuck in. There's no complaining, there's no pessimism that we've seen from her in previous stories, particularly last week. She does get stuck in.
Yeah.
Maybe just not as supportive of the Doctor getting stuck in as maybe she could have been. But maybe it's because she knows him quite well and she knows that he wouldn't appreciate her coddling him.
Maybe.
You know, he doesn't like people criticizing him or saying that he can't do things, so maybe she just knows him well enough to, you know, when they're climbing the pipe, she does ask him how he's getting on, and he says, fine, keep going, and she's like, okay, cool, we'll keep going. But also maybe part of it is, you know, he's her grandfather, he's kind of larger than life, and maybe part of her just doesn't see it. You know, what could he ever possibly need her help for?
I think maybe my views of Susan have been kind of coloured by the sense of we got a great tour de force of Susan in Sensorites, and we're now 2 stories away from Sensorites, and she's kind of gone back to what she was beforehand, and it's like it's so annoying. It's like it's almost like, you know, you eat a bar of chocolate before you find out that bar has gone off the market forever type thing, you know. It's like I've seen the potential, I want to see more of it, and it's just kind of regressing back now, which is kind of it annoyed me, because I do like Susan and I just wanted her to see her, as you said, yeah, she gets stuck in, but more like the supporting member of an ensemble group as opposed to an individual.
Yeah, I disagree with you a little bit, and the reason why I would disagree just in that last description that you gave is I think last week's episode, Reign of Terror, was definitely a step back, and we discussed that last week.
Yeah.
This, I think, if you took out Reign of Terror and imagine they went from Sensorites to this, I wouldn't see this story as a step back, but it's not a step forward either. She's in place. There's no further development. She's just static. That would be my read of it, because the one thing that I did like was how she shows her intelligence and how she figures out quite quickly what happened to them. And when Ian's like, that's impossible, she doesn't say like, oh, well, maybe I'm wrong. She knows she's right. And she knows this is exactly what happened. You have to believe me. So I wouldn't consider the story a step backwards for her, but I wouldn't consider it a step forwards either. So, you know, if we're using Sensorites as our baseline, because it's definitely a step forward compared to last week.
Yeah.
But if we're using Sensorites as our baseline, I think she's in the same position she was then. She hasn't grown any further after that.
That's fair. All right. I suppose in my own just desire, I just want to see like a bit more of the Sensorites as opposed to kind of staying. Like I just wanted to see the next step in her progression. You know.
Yeah. The one thing I actually would have liked to have seen a bit more of, and you know, this was a short story in general, but. You know, we've always seen how Barbara cares for Susan. And actually more so than Susan caring and supporting the Doctor, I would have liked to see her, quote unquote, mother Barbara a bit more. Do you know? Yeah. Return that, not favour, but you know what I mean. And be more supportive of Barbara when they find out what's happening to her, and even beforehand when Barbara's just, you know, looking run down and stuff. It's kind of Ian and the Doctor that kind of take care of her, and Susan's there and she's not being a bitch or anything. Do you know what I mean? But if I was to pick her to be more supportive of someone, I maybe would have tried to have her supporting Barbara the way Barbara has always supported her.
That's fair. I'd agree with that.
Cool. So in terms of our companions, we usually include as well any story-based companions. So these being other characters in the story that have a significant impact. So for this, you had down Hilda and Bert. So do you want to give your thoughts on Hilda and Bert?
So my initial thoughts of Hilda and Bert were that they are very... It comes across like the setting is in a very rural English village. Mm-hmm. Because she's the postmistress and she's also the telephone switchboard operator. And now I know we kind of discussed this before in the past, but I'm just kind of wondering, is she, because it's such a small village, is she a bit nosy in terms of like maybe listening in on telephone conversations to get a bit of village gossip? Which is why like I just, but maybe it's because of the episode 3 edit, because that's what I watched first, and then I went back and I reviewed episode 4. when she starts kind of like listening in on the phone calls, it's like coming from the big house. I just got this whole image of, rather than being something suspicious, she's just nosy. And that was my thought of it. And then when it came to Bert, he's very kind of rural, small town police. I was waiting for the whole, hello, 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 what's all this then type thing. When he made the arrest at the end. I suppose maybe a small part of it is, like, I know that we've said before, like when it comes to like the lost stories and the animated sections of it, we try not to let that take away from the performances. But with this one, episodes 3 and 4, it's recreation actors that are doing the voice for Hilda and Bert. So maybe that's kind of tilting it a small bit for me.
Yeah, so I don't fully agree with you on Hilda specifically, right?
Yeah.
And the example I would go with is, other TV programs that have had a similar character. The switchboard operator who's also the postmistress, who also runs the local shop. She clearly does all of these things. And it's only natural that she would know what everyone sounds like. Because they all have to call her if they want to call somebody else. So my read of it was that clearly Farrow had been making lots of phone calls, so she was kind of used to him calling. And so when she has a new voice coming through, I'm sure there's a little bit of curiosity of, oh, who's this? This person is new. But then he claims it's Farrow, but she knows what he sounds like. And I think it maybe starts off as a bit of like morbid curiosity. Like, what the hell is this? I don't think it's gossip based. But I do think it's just curiosity. And I think once she starts to realize that, hold on, this is the same man, he's just muffling his voice. I think the rest of it comes from concern. Because her response isn't, oh, wait till I tell the ladies about this, or, oh my god, you'll never guess this. She's trying to get Bert to go up and have a look.
Yeah.
To investigate it. So that would be where I would kind of differ with you on my feelings on Hilda. My feeling of Bert, I don't really have one, to be honest. He seems like a nice enough guy, He's not willing to throw his police weight around where he doesn't have justification to do so, which is good. Mm-hmm. But to your point, I think, watching episodes 3 and 4 as separate entities, it's very hard to get an understanding of their dynamic because it's audio being played over the same, like, 5 sets of clips over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to actually figure out where in the story that clip actually originally came from. So it seems like they're doing the same pattern of behavior over and over again.
Yeah.
When that's obviously not what's happening. So you can't really get, like, what kind of facial expressions was he making when she was saying these things, or how panicked was she looking when she was hearing a different voice on the phone, so this is it's the first story where, for me, like, I know we had it a little bit last week with the animation of Leon, but this is the first story for me where the way that they recreated the story took away from the characters for me, particularly Hilda and Bert, who we only get to know in episodes 3 and 4. In the episode 3 condensed version, because of the way that edit was done, and I can't believe that is the version that went to air, like, what the hell, their relationship dynamic, it still makes no sense, to be honest.
Yeah, it's like in the television edit, it's like, who the fuck are these people? Yeah,
and like, their scenes are so randomly chopped in, it makes no sense. So I think Hilda and Bert, are characters I would have been interested to see how it was originally filmed for them. And I think Hilda, to your concerns, I think you may have maybe not liked her more, but I think you maybe wouldn't have thought her as much of a busybody if we'd seen it in its entirety the way it was actually filmed.
I have a feeling that there's a lot about the story that if I had seen it of its entirety, my assessment of it would be very different.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing whoever made the decision to cut it down to 3 episodes, I'm shaking my fist at you right now.
Grr-arg.
Yes, Gerard.
So the two people who we don't have to rely just on the recreations of 3 and 4, or the weird condensed version that is 3, we get a good insight into them in the first 2 episodes, are our villains.
Yep.
So will we do the big bad first or the small bad?
We'll do Mr. Burns first.
Cool. So Forrester, the first 3 words I have down here are cold, calculating asshole.
Yeah, pretty much. And he is very cold. He's very calculating. The one thing though that I just like, for someone that seems so like shrewd and intelligent, like, could he not have come up with a better like story as to why Pharaoh was dead in the garden?
Yeah, it's a little bit much. Although I don't know who it reflects worse on, him for coming up with such a bad story, or Smithers for believing it.
Well, Smithers, I think he has different motivations. So like we'll get into that when we discuss Smithers. But I would have loved to have seen full-size Doctor engage with Forrester.
Oh yeah, oh definitely. That would have been a Doctor Who speech. Definitely.
Oh, it would have been fantastic, because like he's like Forrester seems like the kind of guy that, you know, if you shook his hand, you'd have to like wipe your hand afterwards, like to like, whether it be crude oil or just like palm sweat, you'd have to get it away from you. He's definitely he's one of those guys that wants to own the world type thing, and he's his own worst enemy in that regards, because he wants everything, that he doesn't think of the ramifications of what getting everything will cause. And like, yeah, because like, you know, DN6, which with its initial proposal seems like a very beneficial thing, but because potentially he took shortcuts, or because he wanted it to make it better than everything else on the market, he like overshot the mark, and it is now one of the most deadly fucking pesticides in the world. And therein lies his own downfall. It's his own greed and avarice is his downfall. So he is his own villain.
Yeah, the thing that I find about Forrester is he is very much the big business, do anything for profit stereotype. Do you know? But the thing that I question is he short-sighted by his quest for money? Do you know, where he's already started all of this stuff and he's already has everything lined up to go into production, so he can't wait to see if Smithers can maybe rework the formula? Do you know, like, he doesn't even give that an option. Do you know? And Smithers is quite intelligent, you know, so maybe he could have reworked it. So is it just that he's short-sighted in his quest for money? Or is he just plain evil?
Well, see, this is the thing now, is that we know that he has a lot of money tied up in DN6, but we don't know why. Like, we don't know like what time of the year it is. Is there going to be is there some expected big boom in like pest life on farms that they're looking for a new pesticide on the market? Is it's got something to do potentially with, like, Smithers' whole thing was about pesticide to remove pest-induced starvation. Is there potentially a market for a new pesticide to help starving nations? That type of thing. We don't know what the outer stakes are, so we're left with a lot of assumptions to see whether that is a good question, and I don't think we're going to find the answer based on the story.
No. So I think, you know, it's fairly obvious, though, that in the terms of the story, Forrester is the bad guy. You know?
Oh yeah.
There's no second guessing that. However, we then have Smithers.
Yes, Smithers.
Who, again, the first 2 words I have for Smithers are just poor guy. Like, he's only the villain because even though he doesn't fully agree with Forrester, he goes along with Forrester.
Yeah.
And also, on top of that, the only reason he's the villain is because he is unaware of what his pesticide does. As soon as he reads the report, or as soon as he figures out what it does, he's immediately like, we can't go ahead with this. No, this isn't what I wanted. We need to stop. The poor bastard thought he was doing a good thing and was genuinely devastated when he realized that his creation would be so devastating for the world.
Yeah, because he came across as a bit of a conundrum, like, because he clearly wants to do nothing but good, yet he's also, I'm not sure if I have ruthless down in my notes, but like I'm not sure now if ruthless is the right word. Like, he's so driven to do good that he's willing to cover up a potential murder, or at least a manslaughter, to see his lifelong ambition fulfilled.
Yeah, and he kind of reminds me a little bit of some other scientists that we're going to see in future Doctor Who stories.
Yeah.
You know, Kettlewell kind of comes to mind from Robot.
Yeah.
But the thing is, he's strong-armed into being a villain. You know, he knows that Forrester killed Pharaoh. He knows that. He's not entirely certain how it happened, but he knows he killed him.
Yeah.
And he also knows that if he tries to call the police or whatever, that Forrester will likely kill him as well. So he goes along with it. Does that make him a bad guy in the context of the story? Yes, it does. But you kind of understand it.
Yeah, because I'd be like, one thing I'm just kind of curious about is how would it have played out if Forrester wasn't a complete asshole to him? Like, the reason like that Smithers starts to kind of question about what's going on is more so because of how Forrester starts treating him. And you'd be kind of wondering, like, that if Forrester was a small bit more, you know, we have put down cool and calculating, but if he kind of was a bit more cool and calculating than what he eventually unraveled to be, like try to keep Smithers on side without being a complete d-bag to him, like, the characters could have gone a completely, the outcome for the characters could have gone a completely different way.
Yeah, I think the way so like with Forrester, as in he's cold and calculating, as in he doesn't feel much, whereas he's not cool, he's not relaxed in it. There's probably a difference between those two. I think though, had Forrester, and this is where I said Smithers is kind of an interesting conundrum. Had Forrester been standing closer to Pharaoh, so that his story of we struggled for the gun was believable, would Smithers have been as aware of Forrester's behaviour, or would he have accepted it as normal? Like, the fact that he doubts the start of the story, I think, is why he's so observant of the rest of it. And maybe if Forrester had been stood closer to Pharaoh, or had come up with a better story on why he had to shoot Pharaoh from a distance, maybe Smithers wouldn't have questioned him as much. But I still think the redeeming quality of Smithers is as soon as he read that final page of the report.
Yeah.
Or as soon as he discovered what was written in that final page of the report.
Yeah. No, he tried to pull it back. It's just undo my damage type thing.
Yeah, no matter anything else, that is still Smithers' truth, is I was creating this to save people.
Yeah.
We have to stop.
So that is the characters for the story Planet of the Giants discussed. So how about we move on to our scores and assessments for the story? Trish, how about you start us off?
Cool. This was probably the most difficult story to rate, I'll be honest. Watching the first 2 episodes, I was all ready to give this a 4.
Yeah.
Do you know, I thought the concept was well thought out. The sets and the effects were really good. I mean, they even made giant rubber bungs. I mean, how cool is that? And they had some good science in there as well, you know, with how the sound would be distorted because of their smaller size and things like that, which I thought was great. And it delivered on the message. Like we said, this is going to be the first environmental story.
Yeah.
And it delivers on that message, and we see all of the characters fully in agreement. While Ian obviously is concerned about Barbara and wants to get her back to the ship to make her better, he does still care about what's happening, and he does agree that they need to make it stop. So all of that I absolutely loved. I thought it was very, very well done. I actually like the fact that Smithers is this sort of complex character that, only wants to do good and unfortunately is doing bad things without realizing it. And like I said, like the message that like there is a cost to scientific advancement, and sometimes that cost is too high, and so we need to stop and rethink our situation. All of that is fabulous. And like I said, I was well on the way to giving this story a 4 or even higher. The first 2 episodes were so good. Then we got to episodes 3 and 4.
Yes.
And, we've said that we don't like docking points purely because of the reconstruction. We've docked them a little bit, but not by much, previously. The animation Reign of Terror kind of gave away a little bit for me. And with Marco Polo, some of the sound stuff was kind of irritating. But the way they did the reconstruction of 3 and 4, which for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a combination of some existing shots with proper audio and everything as is, some really bad CG renderings, like really bad,
like early like Nicktoons cartoons type thing.
Yeah, and then playing audio over different clips. And it just immediately took me out of the story, which I hated because, the audio, it was still a good story happening, but it immediately took me out. And reusing the same clips over and over with a different audio was just painful to watch. I would have rather they either did it all in their weird janky CG rendering, because at least it would have been consistent. So like have the existing clips, and then anywhere where they don't have the surviving clip, use the weird CG rendering, or instead anywhere they don't have the surviving clip, just use a still.
Yeah.
So we know who's talking and we have a general idea of where they are. The combined version of the episode. So when I first watched the episode 3 and 4, I did sort of make a note of, okay, maybe you and I were coming at this from the wrong side of things. And maybe our desire to review the entire story was kind of blinding what we should have been actually reviewing. So then I went to watch the combined version, and I nearly had to stop. It's so disjointed. The story loses all consistency whatsoever. As bad as the reconstructed versions are, they are better than the version that went live. And part of me wants to drop this down to like a 2.5 or a 2 even, because it just ruins it so much. But I can't, because the first 2 were so good. So I've given it a 3. And all of that is from the first 2 episodes.
And actually, I'm right there with you in terms of the score. I'm also at a 3. This is the first time since we started doing the show that I felt like I was actually doing work when I was reviewing the story. Because how I do it is I watch an episode a day and I review that episode, and then once the story's finished, I also do the characters and notes from my perspective. But this is the first time I felt like I actually had a job to do. And it's down to, because I watched it as 1, 2, 3, and then I watched it as 3 and 4 afterwards. And for the cut together version, it's just so all over the place. It's like they've left out some really big things that when Smithers makes these realizations, like for example now the dead cat, it's not factored into episode 3. So Smithers' realization seems to kind of come out of nowhere that this is bad. And Bert and Hilda's thing, it's, as I said, like, who the fuck are these people? So it was just so weird. And which is a shame because, like as you say, like the first two episodes were great. Like the Honey I Shrunk the Doctor concept, which is what I'm calling it, it's so much fun to see them play with bigger versions of like normal day things. Forrester starts off as a really interesting villain, and I would have loved to have seen, like maybe in 3 or 4, the Doctor grow, or at least from 4, the Doctor grows to full size and has it out with him on a sort of a moral basis, but albeit with a gun between them. That would have been, it would have been so much better, but unfortunately it's not to be. So with also the same issues as yourself with the, like how they did the reconstructions, I would have preferred to have just been stills and audio. They didn't need to use reuse footage. They should have just used stills and audio like the guys in Loose Cannon did. There's one other part of it that it boggles my mind as to how it potentially works, and it's just funny. Is whenever Forrester is impersonating Pharaoh, he puts a handkerchief over the mouthpiece of the phone, and all I could think of is Police Squad, when like they pretend to be other people, and then when you actually listen to them, it's actually the other person speaking, and it's like I just couldn't get that out. I just couldn't get that out of my head for the entirety of it. So unfortunately, the decisions that were made around the production of this story dropped the score down to a 3 for me, because again, the concept is great, the set design, the acting for the majority of it is really, really good. It's just it's got a weak second act, it's got a weak second half, and unfortunately that's what affects the score.
Yeah, and like I was trying to think, when we were coming into this today, and like because I was teetering on I will be honest, like I was like teetering on the edge between a 2.5 and a 3. Do you know? I was so tempted to go with a 2.5, but I couldn't bear it because it's just so good. And I think if you're someone who, how to put it, I asked myself the question of, would I recommend this story? Do you know? Most stories that are like a 2.5 or a 2, I wouldn't recommend people watch them.
Yeah.
Do you know? I don't think there's any benefit. So I was asking myself, would I recommend this story? And my answer was yes. I would recommend people watch this story. What I would maybe say is for episodes 3 and 4, shut your eyes.
Yes.
And just listen to it.
Or maybe even just like read the Target novelization of the story.
Yeah. Because Terrance Dicks is the Target novel, and he includes all this stuff in it. But it is a great story, and not to, well, we've already jumped the timeline, I suppose it doesn't matter if we jump it again. People often criticize New Who for being too political. And for being too, as our friends on Mission Log say, too bonk on the head.
Yeah.
When it comes to environmental messages. Guys, it started with the first Doctor, and it started with this story.
Mm-hmm.
Who has always had a moral standing behind it. Not every episode is as moral as, maybe an episode of Star Trek or something like that.
Yeah.
But the Doctor is an environmentalist, and he's very much for protecting the planet and stuff like that. So if you're someone who likes those types of stories, or if you're someone who struggles with those stories and doesn't see how they fit into the Doctor as a character, I would highly, highly recommend coming back and watching this. And like I said, either stopping after episode 2 and reading the Target novel for the rest of it, or just close your eyes, or just watch it the way we did, knowing that you're going to have a bit of a disjointed experience, because the story is very good.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Hands down agree on that.
Cool. So that brings us to the end of Planet of Giants. Next week, we're going to see the return of one of our previous villains. The Daleks will be coming back in the Dalek Invasion of Earth.
And we would also have a parting of the ways as well.
Shh. Spoilers. Talk to you next time.
See you guys. Bye.